Hello. My name is Jeanette. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mom, DeeDee Blanchard. This case is pretty unreal and it's full of characters. Claudinia DeeDee Blanchard seemed like the perfect doting mother to her mentally ill and physically disabled daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Gypsy Rose suffered from a laundry list of chronic conditions, including leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and supposedly had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old due to being born premature. This image of them was shattered when a series of troubling Facebook posts were posted to DeeDee's page, and authorities found a gruesome scene at their home. Gypsy Rose was missing, and DeeDee was in a pool of her own blood. But where was Gypsy Rose? And who had murdered DeeDee? The truth shocked the nation, and there are a lot of varying opinions on DeeDee and Gypsy Rose and who was the real victim. Especially when it came to light that Gypsy Rose had no disabilities and could walk and eat by herself. Whoa. So I'll get into that more a bit later. This case is messed up and it has a lot of moving parts as well as a lot of people with mental issues, so this one is pretty controversial. Anytime there's a crime where all of the players are either abuse victims, mentally ill, or have developed mental disabilities, it just makes the case that much more tragic, and I think everyone kind of had their fair share of issues in this case. I'm interested to hear what everyone thinks, so please make sure to like this video, comment down below, and then subscribe so you don't miss my videos. DeeDee Blanchard was born Claudine Petrie in Chack Bay, Louisiana, which is near the Gulf Coast, on May 3rd, 1957, and grew up in Golden Meadow, Louisiana. From a young age, she was a handful. DeeDee was known to steal from relatives as a form of retaliation and sometimes just for funsies. DeeDee just wasn't a family favorite, to say the least. She didn't seem to be the sort of person you'd want to invite over for Thanksgiving dinner, per se. When DeeDee was 24 years old, she met 17-year-old Rod Blanchard, and they were married. DeeDee became pregnant soon after, and they decided to name their daughter Gypsy Rose. Shortly before Gypsy Rose's birth in 1991, Rod and DeeDee separated because he realized he, quote, got married for the wrong reasons. DeeDee wanted him back, but I have a feeling he saw the red flags and knew something was off about DeeDee. DeeDee took Gypsy Rose and moved back in with her family. So, when Gypsy was born, she was a perfectly healthy baby. No signs of anything off about her at all. But all of a sudden, when Gypsy is 3 months old, DeeDee starts claiming that Gypsy Rose suffers from sleep apnea. Now, let me tell you, as a mom, babies with sleep issues are no fun. You watch your baby like a hawk when they sleep, and if there are any signs of abnormal breathing or something else, you watch even harder. So DeeDee starts bringing Gypsy to the hospital regularly, where she would be put on a sleep monitor and tested for all kinds of potential health issues. The thing was, all of the tests were coming back negative. So it just seemed like DeeDee was an overprotective mother, and that was all. I've known some moms who brought their children to the hospital or doctor for every little bump and scrape. And at this point, it kind of seems like maybe this is the kind of mom that DeeDee was. DeeDee, however, became completely convinced that Gypsy Rose suffered from not only sleep apnea, but multiple serious afflictions that she attributed to a mysterious chromosomal disorder. Eventually, DeeDee even claimed that Gypsy Rose had muscular dystrophy and needed a walker. When Gypsy Rose was 7 years old, she was riding with her grandfather on a motorcycle, and they had a super minor accident where Gypsy scraped her knee, basically. At this point, DeeDee basically rolls out a wheelchair and claims that the doctors have given Gypsy Rose orders to use the wheelchair from now on because of this injury, all the time. Anyway, throughout Gypsy's childhood, she ended up participating in the Special Olympics, charity events, and was even the queen of a Mardi Gras parade, which is kind of cool. Around 2nd grade, her mother pulled her out of school to homeschool her, presumably because Gypsy Rose had gotten so sick she needed to be home to be cared for. Gypsy's father, Rod, had remarried and moved on, and DeeDee lived with her father and stepmother during this time. DeeDee seemed to grow obsessed with playing the role of caretaker for Gypsy Rose. Eventually, after some issues in the home, DeeDee and Gypsy ended up moving out to live in public housing, with their bills being paid by either Rod's child support or the public assistance that they received due to Gypsy's illnesses. There is a long trail of hospitals and doctors that DeeDee brought Gypsy to seeking treatment. During these visits, some doubt was cast on the diagnoses Gypsy had received when a muscle biopsy came back showing no signs of the muscular dystrophy that DeeDee claimed Gypsy had. But based on the strength of DeeDee's claims, and with Gypsy not allowed to speak up, Gypsy was prescribed anti-seizure medications, had several unnecessary surgeries performed, and spent a lot of time in the hospital. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated their home and they were relegated to living in a shelter. They were soon given assistance by Children's Mercy Hospital to find shelter in Missouri, and they picked up and moved. After this, Rod rarely saw his daughter. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity built a cute little home for DeeDee and Gypsy with a wheelchair ramp and therapeutic hot tub. The story of this mother and her disabled daughter overcoming all odds and surviving Hurricane Katrina received considerable media attention, locally as well as nationally, and the community came together to help this woman, who now went by Claudinia Blanchard, in her quest to raise her developmentally and physically disabled daughter.
You're the reason I was born to be your mama.
DeeDee and Gypsy Rose were given free flights to see specialists in Kansas City, free trips to Disney World, and even backstage passes to Miranda Lambert concerts, who Gypsy Rose was frequently photographed with. Rod continued making his child support payments and often even sent Gypsy Rose gifts and cards. On her 18th birthday, Rod recounts calling to speak with Gypsy, and DeeDee answered. Prior to handing the phone over, DeeDee did not allow Rod to tell Gypsy that it was her 18th birthday because, quote, she thinks she's 14. Weird, but I mean, whatever. I don't have a disabled daughter. I don't know how I would handle things like birthdays if I did, so. DeeDee never really let Rod come and visit them in Missouri, and she always had a weird excuse for why they couldn't come. Like, oh, my cat has a dentist appointment. Sorry. So during all of this, things were not peachy keen. DeeDee was actually kind of a monster. I touched on it earlier that DeeDee forced Gypsy Rose to do all this. Whether or not there ever really was anything wrong with Gypsy Rose is debatable, but from a very young age, Gypsy was lied to and forced to carry on this charade.
You ready?
Gypsy kind of fits the mold, too, of what you would imagine when you imagine a sickly young girl. She's a small person with a slight build. She's missing some teeth and wears, like, super large glasses and has this very high-pitched, childlike voice. It all just reinforced the idea that she was childlike and frail. Gypsy's mother would even shave her head under the guise that the chemotherapy for the supposed leukemia that Gypsy Rose had would cause it to fall out anyway. Somehow, DeeDee had even persuaded doctors to put a feeding port into Gypsy's abdomen, and from then on, Gypsy was fed Pediasure when her mother was upset with her. Like, until she was in her 20s. So not only was the community convinced that Gypsy Rose had all of these ailments, but for the most part, Gypsy also believed that she had only a limited amount of time to live. Gypsy knew that some of it was real. Like, for instance, DeeDee claimed that Gypsy was just a drool machine. Basically just drooled all over the place. So doctors injected Botox into Gypsy's salivary glands to stifle the drooling, which I don't even know that was a thing, but... Well, DeeDee would then put a topical anesthetic on that area to induce drooling so she could control when Gypsy drooled and when she didn't. And Gypsy knew what was happening. This is crazy. This kind of abuse is called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and this is a very severe case of it. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a condition where a caretaker creates the appearance of health problems in another person in order to gain attention as the caretaker. It seems like this was overlooked due to the family's image as a wholesome family, as well as the longevity of this ruse. Basically, no doctor wanted to be the one to call bullshit on Dee Dee because she was a pretty well-respected part of the St. Louis area community. Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, a pediatric neurologist who saw Gypsy in Springfield, Missouri, became suspicious of her muscular dystrophy diagnosis. Dr. Flasterstein had done a battery of tests and didn't find any abnormalities. He even called out Dee Dee when he saw Gypsy stand and support her weight and said there was basically no reason why Gypsy shouldn't be walking. Dr. Flasterstein went so far as to contact doctors in New Orleans who confirmed that Dee Dee had lied about the original muscle biopsy, which came back negative. At this point, Dee Dee knew that Dr. Flasterstein was onto something and knew she was kind of full of it and stopped bringing Gypsy Rose to him. Unfortunately for Gypsy Rose, Dr. Flasterstein never reported this situation to social services, even though he suspected Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Dr. Flasterstein was told that authorities simply wouldn't believe him anyway, so just to drop it. Dee Dee forced this horrific stuff on Gypsy for her entire life with no repercussions, and as Gypsy got older, she started getting a bit more rebellious. This happens with every kid, and I'd imagine even with disabled kids. When kids start getting their adult parts and adult hormones, they start getting a little sassy, to put it lightly, regardless of their mental capacity. Regardless of this, Gypsy didn't have a developmental disability. This was a complete fabrication. But she did have an attitude problem. And in order to control this, Dee Dee decided the best route would be to physically abuse her.
And I'm not getting out. She wants to get out. Ain't gonna happen. Let her dog take care of her.
You will notice in all the interviews, Dee Dee is holding Gypsy's hand. And she also did this when they were just around others in general. To the untrained eye, this is just a loving mother, reassuring her disabled daughter in a big, scary world. This was in actuality a tactic that Dee Dee used to control Gypsy in public. Anytime Gypsy began to act like she was a normal teen or said anything that led others to believe that she wasn't disabled, Dee Dee would squeeze the living crap out of her hand. If Gypsy stepped out of line in public, Dee Dee would act like a calm and patient mother, but would literally beat her with her hands or with wire hangers when they got home. Literally like that movie, Mommy Dearest. It's so crazy. Oh, and another thing, Dee Dee lied to everyone about Gypsy's age. Like when Rod called to tell Gypsy happy birthday and Dee Dee said not to tell Gypsy her age because Gypsy thought that she was 14, that was true. Gypsy had no idea how old she actually was. Dee Dee had forged a birth certificate saying that Gypsy was 4 years younger than she actually was. I'm assuming to get more sympathy by making Gypsy appear younger and in order to also scam social services for longer. Dee Dee did, however, keep a real copy of Gypsy's birth certificate, and at one point, Gypsy caught a glimpse of it, but Dee Dee brushed it off as if it was a mistake.
My medical insurance has 23.
Okay, alright, so how old actually are you? Let's get that.
19.
19, okay.
Me and my mother are Hurricane Katrina survivors.
Okay.
And my birth certificate was washed away in Katrina.
Okay.
And unfortunately, they messed up, a long time ago they messed up the paperwork.
It kind of sounds like this was the beginning of Gypsy losing the trust she had always had in her mother. Gypsy describes them as having been great friends growing up and thinking that Dee Dee was a great mother, but realizing as she got older that this was all just an elaborate hoax. I don't think Gypsy even knew how elaborate of a hoax it was because her mother lied to her too. Gypsy didn't know the truth at all. Sometime when she was a preteen, Gypsy began to have an affinity for Harry Potter and other things that fall into the category of sci-fi or fantasy. So, of course, Dee Dee brought Gypsy to science fiction and fantasy conventions in full costume, in her wheelchair, and let her have access to the internet to connect with others over this shared passion. This became her first exposure to the real world. and her interest in other people, particularly men, began to blossom. She hadn't gotten much attention from men other than being treated like a little girl. Now, in her cosplay costumes, she felt like she was able to finally act like a young woman. As happens with young adults, her curiosity got the best of her, and Gypsy met a young man on the internet. At this point, Gypsy was actually over 18, but her mother had those documents stating she was underage and threatened the man with legal action. This got Gypsy into deep trouble, and her mother ended up smashing her computer and handcuffing Gypsy to her bed for 2 weeks. So despite demolishing her computer, Gypsy was still able to find ways to access the internet, usually after her mother went to bed to avoid detection. So in 2012, which was a year after the prior incident with the man, Gypsy created a secret Christian Mingle account, and through this account, she would meet a man named Nicholas Godejohn. So Nicholas Godejohn was born on May 20th, 1989, and grew up in Big Bend, Wisconsin. He was kind of a loner type and definitely had some mental deficiencies. He was on the autism spectrum, as well as having a mental disorder, which was reported by some to be a dissociative disorder, but I think this was kind of speculative. And Godejohn also had a criminal background. He was arrested at one point for indecent exposure and had a BDSM fetish. So he was maybe not like the best person for Gypsy Rose to hook up with, but hey, love is love, I guess. Gypsy had a neighbor about her age that she had kind of grown up with named Aaliyah Woodsmansey, who considered herself like a big sister to Gypsy. Gypsy would talk to Aaliyah about the guys she was chatting with and the guys she had crushes on and her plans for their weddings and like the whole shebang. And Aaliyah kind of just figured it was this developmentally delayed girl telling her about her fantasies based on different Disney movies she had seen, until Gypsy met Nicholas Godejohn. Then the stuff she started telling Aaliyah got a little out there, especially for someone supposedly with the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. So Gypsy is telling Aaliyah stuff like she's going to run away with Nicholas and elope, and Gypsy and Nicholas had chosen names for their children already, and stuff like that. Gypsy confided that she had 5 secret Facebook accounts that she used to communicate with him on, and they would essentially use these accounts to have these super explicit BDSM-driven sexting sessions. I guess whatever floats your boat, but I imagine not knowing that Gypsy was a normal 20-something, it would probably seem like things really escalated pretty quickly. Aaliyah essentially thought that Gypsy Rose was being taken advantage of, but didn't say anything to anyone because Gypsy was confiding in her. This relationship was long distance, on and off, until 2015, when Gypsy actually paid for Nicholas Godejohn to come to Missouri to visit her. She kind of had this idea for a romantic meeting envisioned, and they planned it all out. This was around when the live-action Cinderella movie came out, and Gypsy Rose claimed she wanted to see it in costume, like, so bad, oh my God, please, let's go, And she knew her mom would totally be down because that fit into their perfect little image. The mom taking her disabled daughter to see the new Disney movie. Maybe they could take some photos and get more loot, Anyway, so the plan was that Nicholas would be at the same screening of that movie, and he would be in costume too, as Prince Charming. So cute, right? So then they would fall in love and it would be happily ever after. Not so. So this all goes down, and DeeDee just thought that it was creepy as hell that this full-grown man was in a Prince Charming costume by himself to see this kids movie, which she's not wrong. So anyway, at some point, Gypsy hightails it to the bathroom by herself, which I don't know how DeeDee allowed this, but Gypsy Rose apparently then lured Nicholas in there and used her feminine wiles to get him to have sex with her. At this point, it was pretty clear that DeeDee wasn't going to be accepting of this relationship between Nicholas and Gypsy Rose. Because of the control she exerted over Gypsy, there was really no way around it. DeeDee had gone so far as telling Gypsy at one point that she had submitted court documents or something to that effect, stating that Gypsy was incompetent and shouldn't be believed if she were to attempt to get help, which wasn't true. But still, Gypsy had no frame of reference for what the real world was like. She would have no way of knowing this. So Gypsy Rose and Nicholas Godejohn continue to communicate via the internet after this failed attempt at a meet cute, and they end up hatching a plan to murder DeeDee. In June 2015, Nicholas Godejohn traveled again to Springfield, but this time he and Gypsy had a different kind of plan. When DeeDee is sleeping, Gypsy Rose sneaks Nicholas into the home and supplies him with pre-cut duct tape, gloves, and a knife. Then she goes into the bathroom to hide and covers her ears. At this point, Nicholas heads into DeeDee's room. Remember, she is sleeping, and she is sleeping face down, and Nicholas just starts wailing on her. Nicholas ended up stabbing DeeDee 17 times. That's a lot of stabbing. DeeDee was screaming for Gypsy at first, and then everything just went silent. At this point, Nicholas and Gypsy had sex, stole $4,000 cash from DeeDee, and fled to a motel where they stayed and schmoozed for a while, like a few days. Eventually, Gypsy and Nicholas came up with an even better plan. These plans just keep getting better and better, right? To mail the murder weapon back to Nicholas's home in Wisconsin. Of course, so they don't get caught with it. Nicholas and Gypsy proceeded to take a Greyhound bus back to Big Bend, Wisconsin. The whole time, Gypsy was wearing this god-awful Cinderella wig she probably got at the Disney store when she was like 12 years old, and she was caught on multiple security cameras walking unassisted. Surprise? Not surprised. After a while, Gypsy started feeling a little guilty and ended up posting some pretty horrifying things anonymously on her mom's Facebook page in the hopes that DeeDee would be found sooner than later. People didn't like this and responded by heading to the home and then calling the authorities. When they found the family's vehicle, all Gypsy's medical supplies, including all her wheelchairs, and an unsettlingly quiet home, they broke in. The police ended up finding DeeDee and the whole horrific scene of her murder. Immediately, people assumed someone had kidnapped Gypsy Rose, and they would probably be finding her dead or close to it, especially without her feeding tubes and wheelchairs that were left behind, and medications that she presumably needed to live. So Aaliyah, remember Aaliyah, ends up telling the police about Gypsy's secret boyfriend and all their plans they had to get married and have babies and stuff and the weird sexting thing. So the police are able to get the IP addresses of the person who posted the Facebook posts to DeeDee's page. And wouldn't you know it, they track the IP addresses to the Big Bend area, and then they narrowed it down to within Nicholas Godejohn's parents' home, where Gypsy and Nicholas had shacked up. Gypsy Rose and Nicholas were taken into custody in Waukesha County, Wisconsin, and charged with murder, then extradited back to Missouri. So basically everyone was super stoked that Gypsy Rose had been found safe, but the news was met with shock when they found out the truth.
Okay, good morning. I want to specify at the beginning of this press conference that this is an ongoing investigation. And I want to start off with saying things are not always as they appear.
That's when everything fell apart. It came out that Gypsy wasn't disabled at all, and DeeDee had created this elaborate ruse to get sympathy and free things from charity and social services. Gypsy Rose could walk, eat without a feeding tube, and didn't have any of the ailments that her mother had claimed she had. This deception went so deep that even Gypsy Rose didn't really even know how old she truly was. And all the abuse that Gypsy had suffered at the hands of her mother finally came to light. The picture quickly shifted from a murdered mother and her kidnapped, disabled daughter to the image of a deeply disturbed mother who controlled and abused her daughter to the point of forcing surgeries on her for her entire life. For decades. It was pretty clear pretty much right away that the prosecutors weren't going to prosecute this case to the fullest extent of the law, considering the extraordinary circumstances. Gypsy Rose agreed to plead bargain for second-degree murder after they were able to confirm that the abuse did take place through medical records that showed no disability existed. While Gypsy was in county jail awaiting evaluations to be completed and agreements to be worked out, she ended up gaining 14 pounds, which is unheard of. The food in jail isn't anything to write home about, and most people lose weight in jail. In July 2015, the plea agreement was accepted and Gypsy Rose was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Nicholas Godejohn still faced some pretty serious charges because murdering DeeDee was originally his idea, and he was the only one involved in the physical murder of DeeDee. Over the course of pre-trial, Nicholas Godejohn's limited mental capacity was brought up several times. Apparently his IQ was 82, which is below average, but it's not low enough to claim incompetence. This case eventually went to trial in 2018, The prosecution's argument was that Godejohn participated in a lengthy relationship with Gypsy Rose and showed the ability to reason despite the alleged mental deficiencies, such as by planning the murder that they eventually carried out. It's a pretty involved process to travel several states after planning an elaborate murder and carrying that plan out to the T. Eventually, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for the murder, since the prosecutors had taken the death penalty off the table. This case shocked the nation, and the local community was aghast. The paradox of this murder victim also being the primary abuser of this young woman over the course of just about 24 years in order to dupe everyone was pretty horrifying. Dee Dee's family in Louisiana was not surprised about what had happened to her, and they weren't really that upset about it either. Years before, there had been suspicion that Dee Dee had withheld food from her mother, who had been disabled at that time, which would ultimately cause her death. So that really estranged her family from Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose. As for Dee Dee's father, when Dee Dee and Gypsy had lived with him and Dee Dee's stepmother, there was a suspicion that Dee Dee had been poisoning her stepmother. Dee Dee's stepmom had experienced some illness which dissipated when Dee Dee wasn't around and got worse when Dee Dee spent a lot of time at the home. Dee Dee was eventually asked to leave the home and the sickness subsided completely. The family suspected that Dee Dee's stepmother was being poisoned with a weed killer. No one in Dee Dee's family had any interest in holding a funeral or even claiming her remains, which says a lot about their opinion of her. Her father and stepmother ultimately flushed her ashes down the toilet. Gypsy Rose is currently serving her sentence in Missouri right now. She has stated that her life is much better now than it ever was before. Gypsy has the opportunity to get an education, get exposure to healthy social interactions, eat more nutritious food than ever before, and finally has autonomy over her body for all intents and purposes. Gypsy Rose is currently engaged to a man she met through a pen pal correspondence program and is due to be released from prison in 2024. So this case, first off, the fact this case of Munchausen syndrome by proxy lasted for so long is just incredible. Usually this syndrome is discovered eventually. Due to the nature of seeking out unnecessary medical intervention, a doctor will get wise and blow the whistle eventually. Either that or the person being made sick ends up passing away. This syndrome can often lead to death, obviously unintentionally, but that can be a consequence of doing something like this. Medications are meant to be given as needed, and if they are not needed, can pose unknown dangers. It is pretty clear in this case that Gypsy Rose was a victim as well as a perpetrator. However, honestly, I wonder about Dee Dee. After the discovery of Gypsy's abuse, public sympathy for Dee Dee really dried up, and she was labeled a monster. Being a mother, I realized that just about everything my kids do is something they observed or learned from me or other people in their immediate environment. Somewhere along the line, something went terribly wrong with Dee Dee. Whether she was abused or whether she was just completely ignored in her childhood, I don't think she was just an innately evil person. I would imagine that there was some issue that Dee Dee had with getting attention in her home as a child. Perhaps the only time she was tended to was when she did things that like steal and act sick that were negative things. If Dee Dee was conditioned that she would get attention when she acted out negatively, it might have encouraged her to act out negatively. If you never get praise as a child for positive actions, then you may never develop that sense of wanting to impress people through success, but instead you might be inspired to put on a woe is me act. There is some evidence that Dee Dee's mother, Emma Petrie, was abusive to Dee Dee and treated her similarly to the way Dee Dee treated Gypsy Rose. A lot of times in families, children will follow in the paths of their parents, or as the saying goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So it's worth pointing out that Dee Dee was accused of murdering her mother by depriving her of food. Then just shy of 20 years later, Gypsy Rose had a hand in Dee Dee's murder. Even Rod, Dee Dee's ex-husband, brought up the fact that maybe she just got in too deep with the lies she told. Rod is quoted as saying, "I think Dee Dee's problem was she started a web of lies and there was no escaping after. It was like a tornado got started. Some people don't know when to stop weaving their web of lies." I think that when Gypsy Rose was a baby, Dee Dee was able to get attention for the minor issues that Gypsy had, like her sleep issues, and Gypsy being slow to gain weight, which is called failure to thrive. It appears that the abuse Gypsy Rose suffered slowly accelerated from there when DeeDee realized that she could get attention, all of its attention, for being such a good mother. Finally, the praise DeeDee so long desired, except the cost was her young daughter. I also want to point out that it kind of coincided with when DeeDee's mother died, when Gypsy Rose's abuse escalated to the point that she was no longer allowed to walk. I'm curious if DeeDee was receiving some kind of money from the state for caring for her mother, and then when that dried up, she needed a new source of income. I don't know what the requirements are to receive Social Security for your child or your parent, but I bet if they're in a wheelchair, possibly you get more money. At this point, she pulled Gypsy out of school to hide her lies and keep Gypsy away from her peers. Without a frame of reference for what a normal life is, and without the prying eyes of her teachers, DeeDee was free to control Gypsy Rose as she saw fit. I feel like there was definitely a turning point where DeeDee realized that she could get really awesome stuff by playing up the ailments. I mean, Habitat for Humanity ultimately built them an entire house for free. Like, once the city offered to let Gypsy Rose be the queen in that parade, maybe DeeDee was like, this is great. Let's see what else we can get for free. And honestly, that plan worked out for DeeDee for quite a while. But I also think that maybe DeeDee thought that this whole ruse would be discovered eventually. And because it wasn't, she didn't really have a long-term plan of how to control Gypsy Rose. And as she became more rebellious, it became a problem. Eventually, the lie got so big that there was no really going back until someone discovered the truth. It's pretty unbelievable, honestly, that DeeDee was able to keep everyone at bay by telling this elaborate web of lies. It really would have only taken a couple of missteps to make DeeDee's house of cards come crumbling down. Unfortunately for everyone, no one really spoke up or advocated for Gypsy Rose. It seems like just about everyone left her at the mercy of her mother, unfortunately for DeeDee and Gypsy Rose, because ultimately I think they were both victims of this cruel, cruel plot. In the end, Gypsy Rose will hopefully get to live a life that she never would have had the chance to live, and finally get her shot at the happily ever after she always dreamed of. Thank you for watching this video. This one is pretty sad, but I think that it's interesting to try to understand why DeeDee put Gypsy through this. So please comment your opinions down below. Whether you think DeeDee was abused herself and just carried on the cycle of abuse, or perhaps you think that DeeDee just wanted a slice of the government pie and didn't really care what it cost. Maybe you're somewhere in between. Then make sure you like this video and then subscribe so you don't miss my weekly-ish videos. Keep it real.